The hall shimmered with lights that seemed alive, reflecting off the polished metal walls and floating crystals. The grand ceremony was meant to impress the galaxy's most influential species, but for Jonas Marlowe, it was nothing short of terrifying. He had spent weeks preparing not for the honor, but to avoid humiliation. Humans were rarely invited to such events, and he knew the eyes of powerful aliens would be upon him, watching his every move, searching for weakness. Jonas adjusted the strap of his uniform and took a deep breath. His role was simple in theory. He was a guard, but in this place, even a guard could become a spectacle. The ceremony was held to celebrate the signing of the new interstellar trade agreement, and every corner of the hall gleamed with opulence. The floor was a mirror of polished silver, and floating banners hovered midair, displaying symbols from dozens of worlds. The air buzzed with a low hum, almost musical, and the scent of alien spices mingled with the faint tang of machinery. At the far end of the hall sat the alien Queen Zyra. Her presence was overwhelming. Her skin shimmered in deep purples and blues, and her eyes were black voids that seemed to pierce into every soul present. Tentacles swayed gracefully behind her, each one adorned with delicate jewelry that clinked softly when she moved. Every inch of her radiated power, and every movement was calculated, precise, and terrifying. Jonas had only seen her once before in a holographic briefing, but the reality was far more intimidating. The ceremony began with pomp. Alien diplomats floated into the hall using anti-gravity platforms. The sound of ceremonial bells echoed, vibrating through Jonas's chest. He stood near the entrance, hands clasped behind his back, alert for any disturbances. His heart raced, and he felt the sweat forming under his uniform, though he tried to ignore it. As the Queen's gaze swept across the crowd, it landed on him. Jonas froze. There was something about the way she looked at him, an unmistakable mixture of curiosity and disdain. He straightened his posture, reminding himself that he was trained for this, that humans had survived far worse situations. Still, the cold weight of her stare pressed down on him, making his palms itch. "Ah, the human," she hissed, her voice smooth yet cutting, audible enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "Come forward." His every movement was scrutinized, and he could feel the invisible spotlight of alien judgment. The Queen's eyes followed him, and he imagined that any misstep would be remembered for eternity. "You are here as a guard?" she asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. "Yes, Your Majesty," Jonas replied, keeping his voice steady. The Queen let out a soft, amused hiss, the sound like a whisper of wind over metal. "A human. I have always wondered, how fragile are you? How easily do you break under pressure?" But here in the throne room of the most powerful alien ruler he had ever met, the word carried the weight of an accusation that could define his place, or end it entirely. The ceremony continued, but the Queen's attention never left him. Every time he moved, she flared her nostrils or twitched her tentacles, small gestures that were read as judgment by the other attendees. Jonas adjusted his stance again, reminding himself of his training. A guard's role was to protect, to observe, to act, but also to endure. And endure he did. As the ceremony reached its midpoint, the first crisis emerged. One of the floating artifacts, a crystalline orb representing the Alliance's unity, began to flicker violently. A soft hum rose to a dangerous pitch. Jonas's instincts kicked in. He knew the artifact could be volatile. The last thing the Queen would tolerate was an explosion in her hall. Without hesitation, he moved forward, ignoring the eyes of dozens of alien dignitaries and the piercing gaze of the Queen. He reached the orb just as it began to crack, and with a careful touch, he stabilized its rotation. Using his standard-issue toolkit, he applied a temporary stabilizer, preventing it from exploding. The humming ceased, leaving only the echoes of the Queen's surprised gasp. The hall fell silent for a moment. Jonas stepped back, his chest heaving with controlled relief. He had done his duty. He had protected the artifact, the Queen, and the dignitaries. But he could feel the Queen's eyes boring into him like lasers. "Luck," she said finally, her voice dripping with contempt. "A fragile creature relying on luck to survive where true intelligence fails." The rest of the ceremony went on, though Jonas felt every whisper, every glance, and every subtle smirk directed at him. He remained vigilant, though the humiliation stung more than he cared to admit. The Queen's amusement in belittling him was obvious, and while the human part of him wanted to shrink away, another part, a quieter, stronger part, took root. This part of him remembered that humans were underestimated for a reason, and the day might come when that underestimation would work in his favor. As the ceremony drew to a close, the queen rose from her throne, her tentacles swaying with deliberate grace. She surveyed the room, her eyes briefly lingering on Jonah's. Then she spoke, her voice carrying over the hall like thunder. "Guard, remain here. I may have need of you again. Perhaps then your true value will be tested." He would prove that humans were not as weak as the queen believed. The alien dignitaries began to leave, and the hall slowly emptied, leaving Jonas standing near the entrance. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. The hum of the palace's machinery was now quieter, almost soothing, and the reflective floor seemed less intimidating in the absence of the crowd. Jonas's thoughts wandered as he prepared to return to his quarters. He considered the challenges that lay ahead. The queen's remark lingered in his mind. What did she mean by true value? What kind of task could she demand that even the most experienced alien engineers could not handle? He did not know, but he sensed that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. Hours passed, and Jonas sat in his small quarters, reviewing the day's events. He went over every detail, the queen's expression, the flicker of the artifact, the whispers of the alien diplomats. Each memory carried a lesson, a clue to surviving in this world where humans were not often valued. And with each reflection, his resolve grew. He would not be defined by humiliation. He would define himself. As night fell on the asteroid palace, Jonas could still hear the faint echoes of the ceremony, the soft clink of jewelry, the hum of floating crystals, and the queen's cold, assessing gaze. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a small, determined smile. He would be ready. When the queen called again, he would face whatever challenge she presented. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would show her that humans were not to be dismissed lightly. Outside his quarters, the palace was silent, yet alive with the quiet motions of alien servants, engineers, and guards. Jonas could sense the pulse of the empire beneath him, vast and unyielding. He felt small, insignificant even, but within that smallness he discovered a spark of courage, a spark of ingenuity, a spark that might one day set him apart, not as a human to be mocked, but as a human to be respected. And so, as the stars glimmered beyond the palace windows, Jonas Marlowe prepared himself for the challenges to come, unaware that the queen's true test was only just beginning. The end of the first part left him standing at the edge of his own potential, humiliated yet unbroken, and ready for the world or empire that awaited him. The next morning, Jonas Marlowe awoke with a sense of unease. The events of the ceremony still weighed heavily on his mind, and though he had spent the night reviewing every detail, a gnawing thought persisted. The queen would call on him. He could feel it in his bones, though he could not yet imagine what form the summons would take. He dressed quickly, his uniform crisp and neat, and left his quarters, walking the long corridors of the palace. The hallways were quiet, except for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional clatter of alien servants attending to their duties. Jonas passed towering crystal structures that emitted faint light and patterns, casting shifting shadows on the walls. He tried to focus on the routine of his patrol, but his mind kept returning to the queen's words. Perhaps then, your true value will be tested. And yet the queen's summons had never been casual. Whatever awaited him would be dangerous, perhaps impossible, and yet deep down, Jonas felt a spark of excitement. He had survived so far not just by training, but by thinking differently, acting quickly, and trusting his instincts. By mid-morning, a message arrived. It was not delivered by a servant or a comm device. Instead, a shimmering projection appeared in front of him, holographic and unyielding. The queen's image filled the space, her eyes cold yet calculating. "Jonas Marlowe," she said, "report to my private chambers immediately. You are to begin your task without delay. Delay is unacceptable, and failure will have consequences." "Yes, Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head slightly. The projection vanished, leaving him standing in the hallway. He took a steadying breath. This was it, the queen's test, whatever it might be. The chambers were located deep within the palace, past winding corridors and multiple security checkpoints. Jonas's human senses were overwhelmed by the complexity of the alien architecture. Anti-gravity platforms floated silently above, carrying supplies and machinery. Doors slid open automatically as he approached, responding to his presence with a soft hiss. The palace seemed alive, a vast organism of metal, crystal, and energy. Finally, he arrived at the queen's private chambers. The entrance was flanked by guards, alien in appearance and imposing, but they did not stop him. A subtle nod from one of the tentacles of the queen's image confirmed he was expected. The chamber itself was larger than any room Jonas had seen. It was circular, with a high domed ceiling covered in shifting patterns of light. At the center rested a massive structure, the star core. The core was a crystalline sphere, pulsing with energy, surrounded by floating panels and alien machinery. Sparks flickered across its surface as if it were alive, and the air hummed with latent power. Jonas's breath caught. He had seen simulations of the star core, but seeing it in person was entirely different. The queen sat at her throne, observing him. Her tentacles moved slowly, almost lazily, but each gesture was deliberate. "The star core," she said, her voice echoing softly through the chamber. "It is failing. The engineers of my empire have tried and failed to repair it. Its instability threatens not only my palace, but the entire capital. You, human, will attempt what they could not. But I will need access to the systems and any tools available." Symbols shifted and changed, responding to touch, and the screens displayed data in a language that was partially readable, partially intuitive. The human brain had certain advantages in pattern recognition, and Jonas relied on these instincts. He began methodically analyzing the core's instability, noting fluctuations in energy output and irregularities in the crystal lattice. Hours passed as he worked, adjusting stabilizers, recalibrating energy flows, and testing minor solutions. The queen observed silently, her gaze unrelenting. At one point, she leaned forward, her tentacles brushing lightly against the floor, and spoke. "You are slow, human. The core will fail before you understand its nature. Give up now, and your humiliation will end quickly." The surge was caused by a misalignment in the energy conduits. He traced the fault quickly, his hands moving over the alien controls, his mind calculating multiple possibilities at once. In minutes, he stabilized the flow. The queen tilted her head, surprised. "You are clever," she admitted. "Perhaps more clever than I anticipated. But cleverness alone will not save you." Unlike the aliens, who relied on strict protocol and rigid procedures, Jonas began to think creatively. He noticed patterns in the core's energy fluctuations that suggested a cyclical rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. He hypothesized that the core was alive in some sense, responding to environmental cues and external stressors. Trusting his instincts, he carefully adjusted the stabilizers to work in sync with the core's rhythm rather than forcing the system into a rigid configuration. The panels pulsed under his touch, responding to his adjustments. For a brief moment, silence fell over the chamber as if the star core were holding its breath. Then, gradually, the hum steadied. The sparks ceased. The core's energy stabilized. Jonas exhaled, a mixture of relief and cautious satisfaction. He knew the queen would not praise him outright, but he could feel a subtle shift in her demeanor. The queen's eyes narrowed, then widened slightly. "Interesting," she murmured. "You do not follow the procedures of my engineers. You improvise. Perhaps this is why you survive where others fail. But this is only the beginning. The core's instability is greater than it appears. A deeper fault remains." He would need to access the inner chambers of the star core, a place no human had ever been. The queen rose from her throne, moving closer. Her tentacles hovered around her, almost like a protective aura. "You may proceed," she said, "but know this, failure will not be tolerated. If the core fails, the consequences will be catastrophic, and your life may be forfeit." The walls pulsed with energy, and the air vibrated with power. Every step he took was measured, careful, and deliberate. Inside, the core was a labyrinth of energy conduits and crystalline structures. Sparks leapt unpredictably across the pathways, and Jonas had to leap aside several times to avoid injury. He traced the conduits, identifying the points of greatest instability. It was delicate work, requiring precision, patience, and intuition. Hours passed as Jonas worked, his focus unbroken. The queen remained in the outer chamber, observing silently. Occasionally, she spoke, offering cryptic advice or veiled warnings, but Jonas mostly ignored her words, concentrating entirely on the task at hand. Finally, he reached the central chamber of the star core. The heart of the structure pulsed violently, energy radiating outward in waves that could destabilize the entire palace. Jonas assessed the situation quickly. He needed to synchronize the inner stabilizers with the external energy flows, a task that required both calculation and instinct. He worked swiftly, guided by intuition as much as logic. His hands moved over the alien controls, adjusting the stabilizers to harmonize with the core's natural rhythm. The crystal lattice responded, glowing steadily rather than flickering violently. The hum of the star core softened, becoming smooth and controlled. Jonas stepped back, breathing heavily. He had done it, or at least he had achieved a temporary stabilization. But he knew the Queen's observation was not finished. He turned to see her eyes upon him, her expression unreadable. "You have done well, human," she said finally, her voice quiet but carrying weight. "But tell me, how did you achieve this when my best engineers failed?" "I trusted my instincts and worked with the system rather than forcing it into a strict protocol. Humans are adaptable. We learn from what we see and respond quickly. The star core still harbors a deeper instability, and only you may attempt to reach it." As he prepared to descend further into the star core, he realized that this task was more than a test. It was a chance to show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. And though the Queen had humiliated him at the ceremony, she had unknowingly given him an opportunity to prove that strength came in many forms. Not only power or experience, but courage, creativity, and the willingness to face the unknown. Jonas took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to continue his work, unaware that the greatest test of all was still waiting deeper within the star core. Jonas Marlowe descended deeper into the star core, the air vibrating with energy that made his skin tingle. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very atmosphere were resisting him. He could feel the pulse of the core beneath his feet, a living heartbeat of energy that threatened to overwhelm even the most advanced sensors. He knew this was the critical stage, the part no human had ever faced before, and he could not afford mistakes. The chamber he entered was unlike anything he had seen. Crystalline spires rose from the floor and ceiling, forming a lattice of glowing energy. Sparks leapt across the space, arcs of light that could have burned through steel. Holographic panels floated around him, displaying data in alien symbols, constantly shifting and changing. It was chaotic, alive, and dangerous. Jonas's first instinct was to step back, but he reminded himself of why he was here. This was not about fear. It was about survival, problem-solving, and proving the worth of humanity in a world that doubted him. He took a deep breath, centering himself, and began to study the patterns of energy flowing through the core. He noticed something unusual. Amid the chaos, a faint rhythm persisted, almost imperceptible. It pulsed like a heartbeat, consistent yet subtle. He realized that the core's instability was not just mechanical, it was biological in some sense. The structure seemed to respond to external stress, adjusting its flow based on stimuli. Understanding this pattern was key to stabilization. Jonas carefully extended a tool to the nearest conduit, adjusting the energy flow in small increments. The sparks shifted but did not die out. The core responded to his touch, but not as he expected. Every adjustment had a delayed effect, making it difficult to predict the outcome. He needed a new approach. He stepped back and closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the energy flows as a map. Human brains were not limited by rigid protocols. They could see possibilities in chaos. Jonas decided to synchronize his adjustments with the core's natural rhythm rather than forcing it into a rigid configuration. Hours passed as he worked, his movements deliberate and precise. Sparks flew dangerously close, and the walls of the chamber seemed to hum louder with each adjustment. Sweat poured down his face, but he did not stop. He knew that one wrong move could destabilize the entire structure, risking not only his life but the palace above. The Queen observed him from the outer chamber, her gaze unwavering. Her tentacles hovered lazily, but Jonas could feel her presence like a weight pressing against him. At one point, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You think you understand it, human, but the core is older than my empire itself. It does not yield easily. You may be clever, but cleverness alone will not suffice." Suddenly, a surge of energy erupted from the core, stronger than any before. Sparks shot across the chamber, and the walls trembled. Jonas leaped aside, narrowly avoiding being thrown off balance. His heart raced, but his mind sharpened. He traced the surge to a secondary energy conduit deep within the lattice, one that had been hidden from view by the core's complexity. He realized that stabilizing the core required not just fixing the visible problems, but understanding the hidden ones, the underlying rhythm of the energy itself. Jonas worked quickly, carefully adjusting the conduit while monitoring the entire system. The surge began to subside. Jonas felt a glimmer of hope, but he knew it was only temporary. The core's deepest instability had not yet been addressed. He moved deeper into the chamber, following a path that led to the heart of the crystal lattice. The air grew hotter and the energy more intense. Sparks danced dangerously close to his hands, but Jonas pressed on. At the center, he found a massive crystal, its surface cracked and glowing with volatile energy. This was the source of the instability, the heart of the star core. Jonas examined it closely, noting the patterns of energy and the direction of the surges. He realized that the crystal was not just a power source. It was a living system, responding to inputs and reacting to stress in a way that was almost intelligent. He had an idea. Instead of forcing the crystal to conform to the stabilizers, he would work with it, aligning the flow of energy with its natural rhythm. It was risky, something no alien engineer had dared, but Jonas trusted human intuition and adaptability. He carefully adjusted the stabilizers, matching them to the pulse of the crystal. The energy began to settle, the sparks dimming as the core responded. For the first time, the hum of the chamber was smooth, steady, and controlled. Jonas exhaled, a mixture of relief and cautious satisfaction. The Queen's voice echoed through the chamber. "You have done what no engineer could, but tell me, human, how did you achieve this when my best failed?" "I observed the patterns, Your Majesty. I trusted my instincts and worked with the system rather than forcing it into a fixed protocol. Humans adapt quickly. We learn, improvise, and respond to situations as they come." "Perhaps more than I believed." Over the next several hours, he fine-tuned the stabilizers, ensuring that the energy flowed smoothly through the conduits and the central crystal. The system responded predictably now, no longer erratic or volatile. Jonas felt a sense of accomplishment but remained vigilant. One small mistake could undo all of his work. Finally, he stepped back and observed the entire structure. The star core glowed steadily, a controlled pulse emanating outward. The chamber, once chaotic and dangerous, now felt calm, as if the core itself had accepted his adjustments. The Queen entered the chamber, moving closer to Jonas. Her tentacles hovered around her, swaying gently. "You have proven yourself human," she said. "Not only in skill but in character. You did not panic, you adapted. You persevered. Perhaps this is why humans endure even when others fail. Your mind is rare among your species and valuable among mine. Very well. You shall have a place among my advisors with responsibilities that allow you to act, think, and influence decisions. Your kind is underestimated, and you have shown me why that is a mistake. Not through brute force, but through ingenuity, courage, and moral strength." In the days that followed, Jonas continued to monitor the star core, ensuring its stability and refining his systems. The Queen consulted him regularly, asking for his insight on engineering, strategy, and security. Other aliens began to notice the human guard who had once been humiliated and now held a position of influence. Respect for humans grew slowly but noticeably, as they saw the unique value Jonas brought. Through it all, Jonas never forgot the humiliation he had endured. He used it as motivation, a reminder that underestimation was a weakness in others that could become a strength in him. He continued to act with humility, intelligence, and courage, demonstrating that humans were not defined by their size, strength, or status, but by their ability to think, adapt, and persevere. The star core remained stable, its glowing pulse a symbol of human ingenuity in a galaxy that often overlooked the potential of its smallest members. And while the Queen remained as formidable as ever, Jonas had proven that even the most powerful alien ruler could recognize the value of humanity when faced with courage and skill. As he stood in the control chamber one evening, observing the steady hum of the star core, Jonas reflected on how far he had come. From a lowly guard humiliated in a public ceremony to a trusted advisor capable of saving an empire, he realized that his true strength lay not just in his abilities, but in his perseverance and his refusal to be defined by the opinions of others. The Queen entered silently, her presence calm and commanding. "Human," she said, "you have exceeded my expectations. The Empire owes you a debt, and I owe you respect. Know that your actions today will be remembered long after we are gone." He watched the glowing pulse, feeling a deep connection to the energy and the responsibility he now carried. He knew challenges would continue to come, but he also knew that humans were capable of facing them, no matter how impossible they seemed. And in that realization, Jonas Marlowe understood that his journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, full of unknown dangers and opportunities. But now he was not just a guard. He was a human who had proven that courage, ingenuity, and perseverance could stand against even the greatest of powers. The star core pulsed steadily, a living testament to human potential, and Jonas stepped forward, ready to face whatever the future held, confident that humanity's true value had been recognized at last.